kind of get your head around because you are going to be looking at a lot of these concepts as you go through this university course and as you go through into other subjects and then into schools and into further education if that's what you choose to do. Um, the big takeaways, I suppose, this week are we looking at learner diversity and equity and inclusion. So I think maybe what I wanted to do from this checklist is just kind of make sure that we are across all of the different acronyms and all the different things that are there. So within learner diversity, I think supporting plans for students with special education needs is fairly straightforward. VCAL and the life skills pathways are similar but different. So, does anyone know what VCAL is or the VCAL? All right, so the VCAL is the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning. And yeah, it is kind of it's offered to students as an alternative to years 10, 11, and 12. And it really is catered to students who want to move into TAFE or into a specific field. Where where it differs, I suppose, from life skills. Has anyone looked into a life skills pathway or life skills curriculum, which is something that's specific to New South Wales? What would our takeaway be from a life skills syllabus? Where's it different from the VCAL? Yeah, that's true, Margarita. They do focus on life skills. I think life skills outcomes, it's designed for students with an intellectual disability or an imputed intellectual disability who can't access stage outcomes. They're also available from year seven. Year seven to year 12, it counts towards their ROSA at the end of year 10 and also the HSC. The other thing that I suppose is unique about life skills is that you don't have to be a life skills student in all of your subjects. You could do industrial technology timber, for instance, life skills PE, English studies, standard maths, and life skills geography, for instance. So it doesn't lock you into having to do life skills all the time. So I suppose in just defining those two different things, they're definitely alternative streams for students that don't necessarily fit into mainstream education for a variety of differences. I've done a couple of little comparison things that I'll give to Monique to kind of distribute to everyone for next week. But um, yeah, that's a really good distinguish, Craig. VCAL focusing on industry readiness, where life skills focuses on students with intellectual or disabilities, sometimes physical as well. Both pathways for diverse learners, really good. So, in terms of their primary goal, the VCAL is helping to transition students to work, to TAFE or an apprenticeship, to some other avenue rather than school, where life skills is looking at developing independent living, functional and personnel skills. So a lot of the outcomes that you'll get are more about daily living, communication, personal safety, and they can be tailored specifically to a student's needs. Um, the focus for the VCAL is more vocational, hands-on, there's work experience. The outcome there is ideally for employment, for a vet qualification, for some kind of apprenticeship, where the life skills syllabus is more about increasing personal independence. So it's not necessarily with a job at the end. A lot of them will go into some kind of assisted situation, whether or not it's a life skills job, like a work skills program, things like that. but it's that difference between catering for work versus catering for skill. So that's one kind of, um, I suppose, differentiation I wanted to make for you guys there. The other thing we're looking at going through, we know what gifted and talented students are. We've all experienced that kind of thing. These are students that are performing well above what the outcomes would be for their age range. The issue we then have with gifted and talented kids is, are we accelerating them within their stage? Are we keeping them in year 7? Are we going to move them to year 8? Can they do a hybrid where they might be accessing year 8 or 9 mathematics specifically, but then staying in with year 7? The tricky thing with accelerating students is there's a lot of research about keeping them within their age group, in their peer group, to kind of help with those soft skills and social skills and things like that. That's always a really interesting, I suppose, difference. When we're looking at English as an additional language or dialect, what is the difference between EAL/D, English as a language or dialect, EAL, English as an additional language, or NESB, which is non-English speaking background? What are we looking at the differences there? Yes, Japan.
Yes, thank you, Obi. I'm quite not sure, but like I think English is an additional language or dialect. Like those students who like speak English, not their home, but maybe outside.
Mhm.
Their main primary language could be like Hindi or other languages, but non-English speaking background maybe like in those countries where they don't speak English at all, probably like in Chinese, like Asian countries more, like Chinese or Korean. I'm not quite sure if I'm right, but that's all.
It's it's a pretty good go, yeah. So we are looking at English as an additional language. So these are students that might, as you said, it could be a generational language. They might have non-English speaking parents or grandparents in the home. They're accessing 2 languages. When we add in dialects, that's a way that we can also help our Indigenous Australians in there as well, because there's a lot of Indigenous dialects that are spoken at home. When we're looking at, so is ALD and EALD, they're similar. When we're looking at a non-English speaking background, that's more about a context of a student. So the first two are looking at how the student learns. If they're coming from a non-English speaking background, we can reasonably expect that there may be issues with some literacy with the student. Sometimes sentence structures will be mixed up, or punctuation and things like that won't be as fluent for them. So you might find a real disconnect between their verbal English and written English, for example. And that's a lot of the ways where those kids can kind of slip through the cracks in terms of modifications. When we're looking at a non-English speaking background, that's more about us understanding the student in a context. So they may have really good English, but it's not really spoken well at home. They've had to then learn it. It's also the mental fatigue of constantly like translating languages in your head. And for those of you who are fortunate to be bilingual, I'm definitely not bilingual, but it's that real, it's such a fatiguing thing to be constantly, I suppose, changing things up in your brain and deciphering, and what language are you thinking in versus what you're drawing in versus like acronyms and vernacular that comes into stuff in a certain language that doesn't necessarily translate well back. In my experience, the school I'm at, we've got a lot of Asian and Southeast Asian students and a lot of non-English speaking background. And we often find that these students become the main translators for their parents at home, which is always interesting when you send emails home to parents that you think are confidential, but then the child has to translate for the parents. So that's always a very interesting, you learn that once, and then you definitely kind of keep that in the back of your mind with things like that. Or when the student becomes the scribe and there's transcribing emails back from parents to teachers and things. Caught a couple of kids out with that before. Um, when we look at, oh, sorry, is there any other questions about learner diversity? Is there anything I can drill down on more or define? Are we okay with that? Okay, I'll move on with that. I think when we're looking at equity and inclusion, Monique had that really great slide that she put up that had the equity. I'll see if I can find it quickly and just copy it across. And it's about not necessarily giving them the same, but making sure that everyone can access the same or get the same outcome. So it's making sure that we look at um, how can we make it that everyone can access the same education? Where can we get the same outcomes from it? Um, when we look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, their histories and their cultures, there's a couple of different things that we can take into account with that. Um, it's really looking at, uh, sorry, I'm just going through tabs for my notes. Um, it's it's looking at the how, the what, and the why in terms of where your Indigenous students sit within their own culture. So there's a real range of where students will access their Indigenous culture if they choose to access it at all. You get some students that might be from an Indigenous background that choose not to identify that way. You get some schools that have a really, really strong Indigenous community, and you have a lot of beautiful learning opportunities, and students do an awful lot of stuff within that. I think um, any way that you can be inclusive of it and making use of those resources that Monique had put in about the different classroom activities that can be done are really important. The other thing that is just as relevant, I suppose, is then your gender inclusion. And again, this is within your school context and looking at stuff. A big topic of conversation, I suppose, within technologies is keeping girls in STEM and that whole women in STEM movement. So thinking about how you can tweak projects slightly or the resources that you're showing students to make sure that you are being inclusive and it just becomes something in the background that students are constantly thinking of. I teach at a boys' school, so single sex education. And, a lot of our focus is on creating young men that can take on the world with a range of skills. In my faculty of 16, there are 7 women teaching industrial technology, which is pretty insane, like almost gender parity with that. And I use a lot of female examples when I'm showing them artisans and woodworkers and different things like that. Whilst also making sure that there's like positive male examples in there too. I think that's really important that they see that everyone's doing it. Okay. Um, I don't know why that hasn't. So can you guys see the list of terminology that's there, or is that a blank slide for you? Oh, here we go. There's a couple of things in there. Hmm. All right, there we go. So in terms of these terms, we've covered quite a few of them already. Take a few minutes just to look through it again. This is a slide that was added to the module notes, so you should have access to this. Is there anything there that anyone would like confirmation of or some clarity around? There's a lot of acronyms this week and moving forward. All right, I'm going to take silence as knowledge and we'll move on. Okay. The biggest thing to take away when we're looking at inclusivity in the classroom is that we need to ensure that all students can access learning. When we look at access, it's that reasonable adjustments have been made. We can't say for sure if students are going to be able to learn, right? We're not sure um what their takeaways are going to be. but we need to make sure that we have made reasonable adjustments to ensure that students can access, not necessarily will access, but can. Um, we factor in student backgrounds and that students can achieve and demonstrate their learning. When we look at student backgrounds, oh, hang on, there's a couple of questions from the slide before. Assessment for, of, and as learning. Oh, okay. Does anyone mind if I'll go back a slide and we can address that? Beautiful. Let's go back. All right. So when we're looking at, it's the different ways that we can use the same word. So assessment becomes one of those words that has a lot of different meanings. When we're looking at assessment for learning, how are we, it's like how we gave you guys assessment tasks that you can learn from doing the assessment task. When we are assessment, I suppose creating assessments for learning, the act of doing the task is going to be teaching them something. So, is it in like in your context specifically, is it how to use APA referencing well? Is it looking at different resources that you'll have to access as a teacher and putting them into practice? The assessment of learning is then looking at the outcome from that learning and I suppose the product of that assessment and how it has been learned. What are the learning styles that we're seeing? And their assessment of how they learn and whether or not learning was even achieved. We can have the best of intentions to design an assessment task that actually none of the kids have gotten. Like you've done it, you've proofed it, you've run it past another set of eyes, you've given it to the students, and you have not geared it to year 10 woodwork effectively. And all of them have kind of bombed this task. When that happens, most of the time, that is about the task and not the students. When we look at assessment as learning, sorry, my dogs are playing in the background. Assessment as learning, that's when you would set an assessment task for students. Does that kind of break down those three things? So it's assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Please feel free to shout out if I have moved too fast past something, just bring me back into context. Just yell out. It's probably easier than looking at the chat. Okay, so when we're looking at backgrounds are considered. So student background becomes one of these things where you need to make sure that there is communication between home and the school and then to the teachers. In terms of backgrounds, it can be something really simple. I suppose it's a really it's a um, when you're looking at how to make projects and getting students involved in doing projects, one of the things that's really tempting is to be like, we'll make something for Mother's Day or Father's Day. And it's perfect. It lines up with the end of term two and the end of term three, and it's great. And they can take it home. And then you find out that one of the students in your class doesn't have a mum. And you've spent 3 or 4 weeks of class going on about, oh, your mum's going to love it, mum's going to this, and Mother's Day, and mum. And you've really kind of put your foot in it. So that can be something that's, I suppose, easily fixed. I try not to mention parents in a class unless I know for sure that that's happened. Background can also pop up in different places. So it might be that it's an ESL background, it's that non-English speaking, it can be some kind of cultural background, it can be all kinds of things. It can be their family history, it can be religion, it can be race-based, it can be all these different things, but it's something that we just need to kind of factor in. Um, I've got a fairly large Muslim community at my school, and Eid has recently happened, and that was on a Friday. Oh, the weekend, I suppose, the big, you can't really tell, it's all moon based. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But we had assessment tasks for year 11 and 12 on the following Monday. And then there was a lot of students that are wanting to take the Friday off for different types of rites and ceremonies and things like that. But the NESA rules is that if you're a year 11 and 12 student, you cannot take the day off before an assessment task is due. So what would have been a better thing for our school to do is to take in that background of the students, because it's a fair amount of students at the school that it's affected by, and consider moving those assessment tasks, maybe not the day after Eid. So that kind of stuff can be put in. And then when we look at the word demonstrate, demonstrate is just to show example. So what we're asking students to do to demonstrate their learning is going to be varied anyway. Even in a mainstream classroom, students that don't have any moderations, you're going to have a different variation of how students demonstrate their learning. There will be students that limp across the finish line to get a project done. There'll be others that will fly past, and then you can use them to help other students finish their work. So demonstration becomes an interesting verb. This is a repeat, these broad categories of disability used in the NCCD. So, looking at physical, cognitive, sensory, and social emotional, I'll give you just a little while to kind of check over that. We have seen that slide before. Give it a quick read. Remembering that NCCD stands for Nationally Consistent Collection of Data on School Students with a Disability. And its intention is that data can then be shared easily between different schools, from primary to high school, or students accessing different schools. The responsibility is on each school to make sure that data is up to date and that it is shared with the teachers, coaches, other peripatetic staff coming in, all of that. Okay. So the idea is that we're trying not to use deficit language. All right, we're looking at the strengths. So this is a great slide on the superpowers on ADHD, which is something that, I mean, I'm sure all of us have self-diagnosed ourselves with ADHD, watching too many TikToks. But we're looking at ADHD types, remembering that it manifests itself differently between girls and boys. Hormones have a big part to play with it. Medication has a big part to play with it. Family history, personality types. It's one of those things where kids won't necessarily fit into the box that you want. But look at all those superpowers that they have and how well they gear to tech. Creative problem solving, curious, imaginative, energy. That's better on some days than others. Sense of humor, multitaskers. So if we just look at the positives of learning difficulties and disabilities, it's a really great way to change the narrative. And you'll find when you're engaging with a lot of syllabus documentation, it is all written in such a way that it is accessible and it is positive. We're focusing on what students can do, not what they can't do. When you write reports for these students, when you interact with their care groups and the people that are supporting them, it's all positive statements. It's what they can do. Even when you look at the life skills outcomes, the outcomes out of three are can do, needs assistance, or learning or working towards. So there's never a can't do, it's working towards. It's kind of interesting mindset that you can apply to all of the students in your class. Can they work independently? Do they need assistance or are they working towards it? It's a nice kind of shift in your attitude. Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, and I apologize in advance. We have here the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. And this will be a document that you will interact with for a while. Graduate teachers, you can see there, have standards. So all these ones on the right-hand side are the graduate teachers' standards for these different outcomes. So you can see that we range from professional knowledge in standard one and two through to professional practice, three, four, and five, and professional engagement in six and seven. And across graduate, proficient, and experienced, the three levels they have here, you have the same standards, but the expectations change. So it's kind of good to get your head around this. And I've broken them down quite a bit in terms of what needs to happen and what the expectations are for this. Um, One thing I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to for graduate teachers is how often the word demonstrate is used. So again, we're demonstrating, we're showing by example. And we're already knowing that we're going to have a range of what that's going to be. You're going to demonstrate those skills in a very different way. It's different about your school context, your own learning style and teaching style, the subject that you're teaching, the age that you're teaching. There's a lot of different ideas on what demonstration is. So we're going to go through them. In terms of standard one, which is know students and how they learn, we've got the physical, social, and intellectual development and characteristics of students. We're demonstrating knowledge and understanding of the physical, social, and intellectual development and characteristics of students and how these may affect learning. What do we think? Like, let's go in really easy with this. What are going to be physical, social, and intellectual and characteristic, physical, social, and intellectual development and characteristics that might affect how they learn? What about just physical development and characteristics of students and how that affects learning? Think really simply. Okay. An example. I don't know if anyone's looked at the physical characteristics and development differences between 13-year-old boys. Physically, they're going to have a height range of maybe 2 feet between the kids that you get in class. Where do your tools go? How do your benches work? What about your machines? We teach a little metalwork project at my school where we use a mill, which is kind of like a vertical drill for cutting metal. I've got some boys that are 6 foot in a year eight class and others that are shorter than me, and they are eye line with the cutting blade of this machine they're trying to use. That's a physical development and characteristic of students and how that affects learning. I have a box for some of them to stand on. I also have different height benches for kids that are taller or shorter. All right, physical development and characteristics. When we then look at the social development characteristics, Margarita's got a really good example there. Shy as slower developers. Yep, physical and social. You're going to have kids with all kinds of background and how they make friends and how they work with others. How does that affect the classroom? You've now got a range of social development and characteristics. How does that affect it? How are you going to do group work if there's one kid in the class that nobody wants to work with? How are you going to do that group work if you know exactly which kid that is and why they don't want to work with them? Part of going to school, especially in the lower levels of high school, is learning appropriate social interactions. This is even before we bring in students that have got intellectual disabilities that might also hinder their social development. And the last thing, in terms of the characteristics of students, we're looking at personalities. You're going to have a lot of type A students, you're going to have a lot of kids that maybe are withdrawn. This here is looking at demonstrating two things. You need to demonstrate your knowledge and your understanding, two separate stuff of physical, social, and intellectual. Some of those things you will get from school data. You might be able to access their NAPLAN results, their primary school reports. You might be able to look at report comments from their teachers that they had last year or last term and read between the lines about what those teachers are saying, because we know the vernacular that teachers use when they want to write a report for a difficult student. It's, I suppose, how we've looked at how they're different in terms of physical, social, and intellectual. In the chat, and I'm going to give you some time to think about it, how do you think you will be able to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of those three things? All right, there's some good suggestions coming through on the chat. Thank you for those of you who have volunteered some examples. Um, we'll move on to element 1.2. So we're now looking at demonstrating knowledge and understanding of research into how students learn and the implications for teaching. So again, it's one of these things where it's maybe four things breaking down in here. We're demonstrating knowledge of research, demonstrating understanding of research, then demonstrating knowledge of the implications, and demonstrating the implication of the of research. So it's knowing what is happening, but then it's knowing how this is going to affect your classroom and what it's going to do. There's a big joke, especially with teaching boys, that after lunch on a Friday is the worst possible time to be doing anything with anyone. If it's windy, if the moon is full, if Mercury is in retrograde, there's a lot of things like that. You will, as you get better knowledge about your class, you will know that maybe doing a theory lesson on a Friday afternoon when you're learning new concepts may not be the best fit for them. You will look at perhaps possibly that one class on a Wednesday morning. It's midweek, everyone's medications dialed in, no one's got training before school, no one's exhausted from the night before. The state of origin is on a Wednesday night, not a Tuesday night, so everyone's going to be like wide awake and alert. So we're going we're going to go in and we're going to learn this concept now. And it kind of helps shape what you're doing with your lesson planning and your units because you understand your students. It doesn't say here that research has to be academic research. It can be research that you've collected. It can be your observations. It can be your own notes. It can be notes from other people. Your best asset sometimes at a school is the teacher that taught the class before you, or someone that's taught that student before, even if you know what didn't work and you can try things that way. For element 1.3, demonstrating knowledge of teaching strategies that are responsive to the learning strengths and needs of students. So again, it's that positive language there. We're responding to the strengths of students, not their weaknesses. It's implied that through element 1.1 and 1.2, we already know what their weaknesses are. What we're doing is we're focusing on strengths. So it says here, in terms of your knowledge as graduate teachers, that we are demonstrating knowledge of teaching strategies. You don't actually have to demonstrate those teaching strategies yet. Um, at the proficient stage, you are required to design and implement these strategies. The other thing to take away is that students, we already know that the students in our classes are going to come from a diverse group of linguistic, cultural, language, and socioeconomical. Um, we're looking at how we can cater to those learning areas and be language based. We've looked at students from non-English speaking backgrounds or English as another language. Cultural could be race, could be religion, it could be school-wide or a dominant cultural group. It could be one student. Language kind of goes in with linguistics. Um, I think socioeconomic is sometimes a hard. Um, the school I work at, to put it in some context, it's we get some students from fairly affluent backgrounds at that school. A lot of students that don't struggle for anything, all kinds of things that are just handed to them. We also have some country boarders that come from pretty remote and rural areas of New South Wales. Um, and the farm's been mortgaged twice for them to be able to go to this school. So you've got to be really aware that even at a school, like our school fees are fairly extensive and the grounds and things are extensive, it doesn't mean that every student at that school is accessing the same funds as another student. So it's something to consider when you're looking at kids bringing in things from home, or if you're at a bring your own device school, the devices may not always be the same quality or access all the time. So it's something just to be aware of. It's always better to err on the side of caution with things. Teachers at your school, whether or not they're your year advisors, year coordinators, or housemasters, if you've got a similar structure to my school, that can give you a bit of background into what's going on with those kids. Um, any questions so far? It's just a lot of me talking. I hope we're all being soothed by that. Uh, okay. When we look at element 1.4, comes into our Indigenous students. So we're demonstrating broad knowledge and understanding of the impact of culture, cultural identity, and linguistic background on the education of students from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds. Again, it's an element that's got multiple parts: culture, cultural identity, and linguistic background. So how do we define the three? What are the differences between the three? Does anyone have any ideas that they'd like to share? All right, I'll be brave. I was looking at a way that you can kind of define it a bit easier. If we look at culture as the way of life, so their spirituality, the social structures, and their expression. So a lot of their art and dance and things like that. The Dreamtime stories would fit into that. Cultural identity, I would define as the sense of self. So it's their connection to heritage, who you are, where you come from. And again, some students will connect really well with that, others aren't interested. That's up to them how they want that to happen. Their linguistic background becomes the voice, their traditional language. Remembering that at one time there was over 250 Indigenous dialects in Australia. So it's how they then access. And then possibly we look at the language that exists in between English, Aboriginal English, and their traditional languages. What's a way, and access this in the chat, or please just speak up. What's a way that we can demonstrate broad understanding of the impact for our Indigenous students in our classes? What's something we can do? I think for this one, it becomes tricky if you don't have students that legitimately are Indigenous or identify that way. I know it's one of those things where you may be at a school where you don't have any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander nations background students there. It's becoming less so, but it does happen. So much so that this outcome in the independent system in New South Wales, if you have no students that meet this outcome and it's signed off by your principal, you don't have to address this outcome in your paperwork. So that does kind of happen. I think when we're looking at understanding the impact of culture, it's not just about having an outcome that addresses the Indigenous standards, because that does come across all syllabuses and it should. NESA have worked really hard to make sure that we've got meaningful Indigenous culture across all of our syllabuses. It's looking at how that cultural background is going to affect how that student learns or how things are understood. Um, I can give you an example from a previous school that I worked with, a Sydney-based school that had a really high Indigenous population on purpose. They did a lot of community outreach, a lot of bursary programs with students across New South Wales from rural and very remote areas. There was one boy I taught that lived 4 hours drive from Moree. So by the time he got to Moree, he then had to do another 4 hours, which is just, it's too far to come to school from Sydney. But we had a boy there who was an Indigenous student, had a really, by the time I left that school, I think there were 56 students that identified as Indigenous at a school, just pretty amazing for a Sydney-based school. Um, and when he went home in the holidays, so again, to put it in context, it's a GPS boys' school, Greater Public Schools, very wealthy student peers, has to wear a blazer and a tie all year round, expectations, shiny leather shoes, a lot of religion, Catholic-based education. When he went home, he was somewhere in Darwin, no fixed address, and he lived in a nomadic kind of tribe, I suppose. It's not the correct language, please forgive me. That had no fixed address in Darwin. And when he came back to school from the holidays, we had to encourage him to wear shoes because he hasn't worn shoes all holidays. It's just not something they do. And he would often just go rogue. He would go bush. He would just disappear for half a day, which is not a great thing. But he would just have a real struggle about bells and wearing the uniform and the shoes, let alone wearing a tie or his socks pulled up straight and things like that. I I worked with his housemaster, and there was a lot of things where we'd have to just be like gradually bringing him back into school and then letting him go rogue in the holidays and things like that. And at times where it didn't matter, he was allowed to have that kind of freedom. So that was where it kind of impacted on the classroom and his education in terms of his culture and his background and things like that. So you may not have anything that extreme, but that was definitely an example that I had when I was teaching at that school. As opposed to looking at how that cultural outcome, even though it's specifically written for Indigenous, it does relate to students with other cultural backgrounds as well. All right, we're almost there. 1.5 is then demonstrating knowledge and understanding for strategies for differentiating teaching to meet specific learning needs of students across a full range of abilities. And that's what we're kind of looking like at now. I don't think I need to drill down into that one. It's pretty straightforward. Again, the full range of abilities just means within your context, the abilities that are there. 1.6, um, in terms of demonstrating broad knowledge and understanding of legislative requirements and teaching strategies that support participation and learning of students with a disability. So again, two parts. We have the legislative requirements. They are your mandatory legal obligations that ensure students with a disability have equal access to education. Teaching strategies are going to be the practical methods that educators use to meet those requirements and support learning. You may not be in charge of those legislative requirements, but it will be something that you'll have to interact with at some level. So if we think about dividing it up, that the legislation here is the what and the why. We have core obligations. Schools must ensure that students with a disability can access and participate in education on the same basis as students without a disability. That just goes, that's what it is. Mandatory consultations, where teachers are legally required to consult either not so much with the student, but with their caregivers, parents, caregivers, to identify their specific needs. This may also then include external psychologists, um, external occupational therapists, all kinds of things. There's a big network. Some students have access a wide network of professionals that are helping them. Reasonable adjustments are legislatively required by schools to adjust curriculum assessment and the physical environment to remove barriers to learning, reasonable adjustments. Without doing these, so failure to meet those requirements, it can deal with legal accountability. So schools can be in big trouble because of this. And I suppose, again, working with students with disabilities, it's different across schools. So department schools, if you are a feeder high school, if you are the local high school of a feeder primary school, and there is a student at that feeder primary school, for instance, that may access, that may be in a wheelchair, may have mobility issues, as the feeder high school where that student could go, you need to get up to speed for that student to come to your school. There's a really famous example, Mossman High School in Sydney. Again, all my examples are New South Wales. I don't travel. But Mossman High School had a nearly $3 million upgrade a while ago now, let's say 15 years ago. And they had all kinds of ramps built and lifts. And the reason it cost a lot of money is because Mossman High School is a heritage listed school in the middle of Mossman. It's absolutely landlocked in Mossman on Military Road. And so when adding lifts to a heritage building in Mossman, you have to then fit into all the heritage standards that the council puts in as well. So it did cost a lot. And all of these ramps were put in and access and all kinds of things, disabled parking spots, because there was a student at Mossman Primary School that had a wheelchair, had multiple sclerosis and access to using an electric wheelchair. Then that student didn't go to Mossman High School, went to a private school for year seven. The money was still spent upgrading Mossman High on the option that this student would go there. So that still falls under a reasonable adjustment. We look at teaching strategies past the legal observation. If the legal requirements and the legislative requirements rather are the what and the why, the teaching strategy is the how. How am I using specific pedagogical techniques and classroom adjustments to deliver the curriculum effectively? They are informed by the legal requirements, by the legislation, but they're flexible and they're tailored to individual student profiles. Some of those things could be changes to instructional techniques, could be direct instruction or scaffolding, chunking. I hear a lot of people breaking tasks into smaller, manageable steps. It could be universal design for learning, providing information in multiple formats. Are we doing audio, visual, hands-on to cater for processing needs? Is it what you're going to do with your classroom management? Are we implementing a visual schedule? Are we doing a routine? Do we have a quiet space for students to be able to go and emotionally regulate and focus? Do you have the advantage of being able to spread the classroom? Um, Assessment adaptations are offering alternative to written tests such as oral presentations, portfolios, providing extra time, having a scribe, having a reader. So in terms of the things that you can adapt, and this would look at what you're doing a bit in assessment two, thinking of the unit of work that you're putting together and wanting to range those students, techniques, universal design, classroom management, and adapting assessment. It'd be the four areas that I'd be looking at how I could be doing modifications. That was a lot. That was a lot of talking. Okay. Does anyone need any of those broken up any further? I hope not, but I'm happy to keep talking if we need to. All right, wonderful. We might move on. Craig's put a very cool story in the chat about Indigenous kids just walking out. Yeah, it was this boy, to go back to this he was a lovely boy, but he would just go walk about, and we would just, and it's going to sound terrible, we would lose him in Lane Cove. He would just disappear. And a lot of the schools I work at, they're boarding schools, so they're open all the time. Residents live on site, students need to access back and forth. The school I'm currently working at, we've got 1,500 students. And I'm just trying to think how many at last count. There's about 80 or 90 boarders per boarding house, 4 boarding houses. So let's say 320-ish boarders. But there are 50 staff residents on campus. And those, staff will come with partners and families and all kinds of stuff. So the school is open all the time. And this boy would just disappear. He'd be up to the shops and looking around Lane Cove Shopping Centre and going, oh, I wonder where this boy's gone. So, classroom management in some access there. I think we eventually got him um, to at least check in and say, okay, I'm going now and this is where I'm going. That was a big modification we had. Um, yeah, it's interesting. And then understanding the culture behind that. Okay, we might move on. All right, next slide. This here, and I hope you can see this well, is an example of a student management system called Central. And this is similar to some of the management systems that you might have seen before. Um, there are others that are very much the same. And you can see there that you've got an overview of attendance. You can see some background. You can see, I mean, in just general facts on the side, date of birth, age, gender, religion. I suppose looking at the attendance overview, 66.7% attendance could potentially be worrying if it's unexplained. Different schools will do different things. Data is your best friend when getting to know students. Definitely, but can't. You'll have to look at some of these things whilst you're on placement because you won't be able to do the outcomes without it. Sometimes I know at my school, we from Central or our version of Central, we have our role and it's got all different icons on the role. So it's like a plus or the hospital sign for a student with a medical. It might be a lightning bolt for something that's an alert of some kind. And we get all kinds of alerts, all kinds of different things that will give you medical. It could be severe allergies. We have a couple of non-verbal autistic students that you may not necessarily teach, but you might come across in the playground. They're going to be the ones that if you are on playground duty and you accidentally say something that triggers them, you're going to be in a world of disaster. So those are well known to all staff. You might have little background checks where parents could be going through a very nasty divorce, and you have to make sure that you email both parents. Or in some cases, you have to email the parent's solicitor when you're emailing home. So there's a lot of different things that come into it, besides just basic history. You might be able to access past report comments, have a look at whether or not they've got like a range of different things. What I like doing in my role as housemaster, I have to do a lot with attendance, which is just not my favorite part of my job. But it's always interesting to me to go through and look at the trends of attendance when you've got serial avoiders, like whether or not Monday mornings are really just not their thing. And so they're not getting to school until recess, or perhaps they don't like English. So they're just deliberately avoiding those classes. And it's good to see patterns of behavior. Um, Sometimes it's interesting if students have medication that they take during the day, whether or not their behavior is better straight after medication or it has to settle in for a little bit, and you can kind of plan for that. It's not a foolproof system in any of them, but yes, if you don't get access to this kind of data on placement, I'd be asking to at least have a look at it. It is an important thing to kind of see. There's obviously going to be issues with um, privacy and the Information Act and things like that, but you're covered as university students with that. Your supervising teachers, when you're there on your placement too, should be talking to you about this kind of stuff because it's helpful. And they might have the same kind of thing with icons on the roll or how they can how they're informed of this information. So it's something I would ask if you're not given, you may not be given access, but you might be able to just see whether or not you can get someone else's access and just jump in for. Um, so let's have, I mean, in terms of going through the rest of it, their skills, their experiences, their subjects. Not so much in year 7, because pretty much year 7 and 8, you're not necessarily picking electives. Some schools will do a year 8 elective, but further into year 9 and year 10, it's interesting to see the patterns of who picks what subjects. And you might find there's a core group of troublemakers in your class that are also in the same PE class causing trouble and also in the same language arts group causing trouble. So you can kind of see this pattern of behavior. So that's a really interesting thing to kind of drill down on these kind of kids. At my school, I'm just trying to think about my year 11 timber class this year. I've got a lot of boys that do woodwork, business studies, and PDHPE. So we're talking a lot about protein and how to make money. So that's not interesting for me, but that's where their brains are at the moment. A lot of sportsmen in that class too. So for me, it's good to know that if I want to do an early class, I can't do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays because most of them have rowing before school. And then next term, when we move into winter sport, we'll have training on Wednesday and Friday afternoon. So again, it's working out um, how to working out where I can offer time for students. It's not going to be a drama with their existing commitments. But Can's asked a really good question. How do we deal with troublemakers properly without getting in trouble? Do you mean like without teachers getting into trouble? Every school will have a slightly different system of how you deal with behavioral issues. Sometimes they'll be known to you. So we've talked a lot too about intellectual disabilities and deficiencies. There's going to be behavioral stuff as well. Very rarely do you have a student that has an intellectual disability without some kind of behavioral something, right? Um, they usually go hand in hand. And it will, again, depend on the moon, the tides, the wind, the time of day, all of that. I I suggest documentation. Documentation is going to be your best friend and working with your direct line managers. So for me, as a classroom teacher, my first line manager is my head of department. That might be me going into the staff room and going, "Oh, Simon, these kids. Oh my gosh." And he might go, "Okay, what are we doing?" We'll have a conversation. That way I've got someone that I have spoken to. It might be that there's a detention system. It might be that you've got a school sergeant, that you've got to loop in some kind of disciplinary person, but documentation is going to be your best friend. I would also suggest start small before escalating. Maybe it's just that you can hold a kid back at the end and say, listen, mate, what's going on? All right, how can I help you enjoy your time here? I don't like when you do X, Y, Z. It's going to affect this, 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 and see how that goes. If you go in too hard too quickly, then your only option is to escalate. So if you can start small, sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes, again, if you know the subject they've come from, if you know a bit of their background, you can say, hey, listen, I know you just had music and that's a pretty boring class, or you've had to sit still, but I really need you to come here and lock in. And you doing this kind of behavior is not helping, blah, blah. Right? So sometimes it's just about meeting them at their level and treating them like grown-ups. Some of the best advice I ever got given in my first couple of years of teaching is that you should talk to your students in a way that you would want to be talked to, for starters, but also scale them up. So I never say boys to a classroom because I don't want them to act like boys. I'll say gentlemen, gents, men. I want them to act like young men in my classroom. I want them to be gentlemanly. So by addressing them as boys, you are lowering them and you are lowering the expectations of behavior. So always gents for me. Sometimes it's knuckleheads, sometimes it's um, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, they address them to where you want them to be or what your expectation is of them. Does that help at all, Bakant? A bit off topic, I know. Okay, to get back to the slide. Knuckleheads, yeah. Knuckleheads does work, especially when you've got the rugby group, the rugby PE group, knuckleheads, all of them. Okay. You're not going to memorize all their data. It's just not going to happen, but you need to know where you can access it quickly. I would also too, in terms of addressing student needs, sometimes it's better to not react straight away. So you've got all this data here. You might not remember 100% what's going on in your class. Hopefully, you've only got a few students that need extra help or modification or any kind of extra supervision. Sometimes you'll have 16 students in a class of 20 that have some kind of medical diagnosis, and it's all different, and they all need different things. And this student needs things printed on green paper, and this one likes bold fonts, and this student needs it as a microphone, and it's a lot. So it's one of those things where you're like, huh, that's interesting behavior. I'm gonna sit with this for a second and I'll just check the data before acting. So that's always an interesting thing to do if you have multiple. When we get to things like NAPLAN, reports, attendance, and their profile notes and learning plans and things, this is all stuff. There isn't a NAPLAN that relates to tech. So they'll do NAPLAN in literacy, numeracy, comprehension, things like that. But it does help you get a sense of what they're like as a learner and what they're going to avoid. If you've got a student, and this will happen a lot, that loves the practical side of a tech class, loves it, can read a plan, is pretty good with their hands, is just like absolutely knocking their prac work out of the park. But as soon as you get into the theory room to do a folio task, becomes an absolute rat bag. And he's constantly like being disruptive and I don't want to do this and why do we have to do this? Miss, I don't understand why we have to do this and why can't we do prac? There's probably something in the data that's going to back that up. And maybe that's the student who you really subtly give a scaffold to. You've already emailed it to them. Or maybe you just give everyone in the class a scaffold and you work together. When you kind of go through the design brief that we were looking at last week, I might write with them on the whiteboard to start with and then separate them out when it gets into stuff that relates to their personal work. There's always a reason behind the behavior. That's what I will say too. Okay. If we look at the NCCD profile, which is here in the red, versus an individual learning plan. Now, there's differences between these two, and you betcha I have notes. The main difference between the two, the NCCD profile and the ILP, is that the NCCD, it's annual, it's systemic, and it's a data collection tool. This is where all the data goes. So you might, again, be working with a number of different professionals, but this is where the data is stored. It's there for reporting and it's there for funding. Funding is the most important thing because kids that are on the NCCD get government funding. And it's really important that it's up to date. And so all of, excuse that, suddenly very excited dogs in my house at the moment. It's there for funding and reporting. Okay, they're gone now. So it's one of those things where when money is on the line, especially at lower socioeconomic schools or where people need that kind of service, and it might be that you have a classroom aid based on NCD funding. So that's really important. ILP is more school level. It's a working document. It's meant to change, and it's designed to guide a specific student's learning strategies and support. And it's a shared document between their teachers. It might be a learning support teacher, it might be an occupational therapist, but it's something that's kept within the school. And by within the school, it's possibly shared with parents, it's possibly shared with external operators if you do have them, but it's got different things. So they act differently. When we look at an NCCD, it's meant to be an overview of students with disabilities. We're informing funding allocations. It ensures that the school is compliant with the Disability Standards of Education 2005. It's all the legislation that goes in there. Usually it happens around August. I don't know if that's the same for all schools. My school, everything has to be in August. So at the end of term three or the beginning of term three for New South Wales, there's a lot of things about making sure that the plans are updated and we've got all the information. Quite often we'll get emails from learning support that'll be like, can anyone provide comments on this student and how's he tracking in your class and things like that. Um, the focus of the NCCD is to classify the level of adjustment. So we're now looking at, is it supplementary adjustment? Is it substantial? Is it extensive? And then a category of disability. So it becomes quite clinical. It's just, I suppose it's a snapshot taken on a specific date, providing evidence that reasonable adjustments are in place. So it does kind of every 12 months. And sometimes if you're addressing an NCCD profile student close to the end of that 12 months, it might not look like the same student because it's just a little snapshot where the ILP is constantly updated. The content in there is evidence of teacher judgment, it's attendance, it's documentation of adjustments, rather than detailed daily lesson plans or strategies. So it is a bit more um, surface level. When we look at an ILP, sometimes they're referred to as an individual education plan or a personalized learning plan. It's all different stuff. It'll be the vernacular that your school wants to use. But it's a working document. It's created in collaboration with parents and caregivers and professionals. This is meant to define specific academic, personal, and social goals for a student with a disability or additional learning needs. And that could be very surface level too. If you've got high needs kids, it could be that we're going to practice asking Sean open questions. So the difference between closed and open closed questions can be answered with a yes or no. And we've worked out, hypothetically, that this student, Sean, is very good at saying yes. So when teachers go, did you understand opening with open questions? Which parts of that did you understand? Yes. That doesn't answer the question. So now I know that you don't understand. So it could be those kind of strategies that we want to go across the board. We could be making sure that this student raises his hand in class, that he asks permission to leave, that his uniform is done. It's kind of, again, these are potentially students accessing life skills outcomes. So we're looking at across the board soft skills that students will need to know. It could be that we're encouraging this student to ask 3 questions in the lesson. And we want you to ask 3 questions in English and history, maths, in tech, in languages, and in PE, because that's the 6 subjects you have that day. The focus here is outlining teaching strategies, modifications, and adjustments, and it can constantly change. So this might be where this student potentially has an appointment with an occupational therapist. Their OT has suggested that they need to start doing something specific. The ILP can then be updated, and the idea is that those teaching strategies will funnel through the rest of the subjects. It's a living document. So it's something that can, I mean, usually it's updated once a term or once every 6 months, but it can be updated as frequently as it needs to be. And it's a really important thing when you're doing behavioral management. It might be that students have certain restrictions or they're not allowed to go to certain places, or that, if it's a student that's dealing with attendance and absenteeism, about how we're getting them to school. And sometimes it will contain long and short-term goals that the students' strengths and interests relate to, and then specific interventions about that. So they do work hand in hand. The NCCD records the support that is happening. The ILP helps shape that support. So they work together, but they are very different documents. If you do, I suggest looking at that trauma-informed teaching and wellbeing practice as something that is coming into vernacular about how trauma can affect students. It hasn't always been, but that's something that's really important. Is there anything else I can talk about with the NCCD or ILPs? I already apologize that this is very content heavy today. Anything? All right, let's move on. Okay, so here, in terms of the four areas that we can provide adjustments, being content, process, product, and environment, this example here has been made by a student with a learning disability. Cognitive, social, emotional, and a trauma background. This is a photo of their work. Adjustments were needed to extend. Um, there were definitely modifications in the content, the process, the product, and the environment, but the students still completed the same task as the rest of the class. In terms of modification of the content, it doesn't look like, from a practical perspective, that too much of the content was changed for them. It's the same project. I would imagine that more modifications were made in the process. So, has this been assisted by the teacher, not knowing the disability necessarily? It's different. We can see that there's different handles put on this one. That might have just been a design choice as opposed to something that had to happen. We can see that the ones in the background look like they've got laser cutting on the inside as opposed to the paint. That might have been just an easy way for that to be accessed. They might have done a similar painting treatment in visual arts. So it's something that they feel comfortable and confident with, something that was easily achievable. Whereas working with the laser cutter can be stressful. You know, you've got to learn a computer-aided drawing software. You've then got to work out the right sizes. It doesn't always work. Specific things need to happen. It might be a really easy change or a swap for teachers when time is not of the essence. So rather than going through and having to scaffold and modify how to use the laser cutter for this specific student that we know has cognitive disabilities, let's just do this paint thing. Paint looks really cool. Definitely a cool treatment. The design brief might be something as simple as adds a decorative element. So they're using paint in this case to add the decoration rather than using the laser cutter. Still meets the brief. The task has been set. We have made our little tray. We've got handles on it. I'm just trying to see whether or not the joinery is different. The joints look to be the same. The decoration looks different. Evidence that students can access the same stuff. Okay, we go back to our favorite, the design brief. We have got create a simple light that uses a combination of materials and a circuit that is designed for a specific purpose or user. But in this, wait, hang on, sorry, go back. Here is the breakdown of our class. So we have 16 girls in the class, which sounds very noisy. We have 6 students on the NCCD register. There's 1 student with mobility restrictions, 10 students with a reading, writing comprehension in red on their NAPLAN profile, which means that they are performing well below the average for their age and stage. 1 English as a second language student was almost nonverbal. 1 student is on the autism spectrum disorder, does not need task modification, but her learning goal is to work with others and share. How does this classroom dynamic affect how you're going to teach this unit? What are some of the essential questions that we would need to know? Very varied needs here. How can we modify the content process, the product, and the learning environment to suit that class? Just as a surface takeaway. Yeah, Tamna, based on their prior knowledge, absolutely. How do we know their prior knowledge? Brainstorming? Yep. Are we talking about like teachers brainstorming ideas or that it's a task you would ask the students to do? Yeah, Craig, a diagnostic task is great. Ask them at the start of the lesson, do a little quiz. What are we asking them though? We asking them about their background? Do we know how to light bulbs? Yes. Do we? I think when we're looking at it here, look for the similarities, right? Now, we don't know how many kids are in the class. We could assume as a technology class, we're hopefully no more than 25. Hopefully. Hopefully, it's closer to 20. We don't know what the combination of things here. Is it one girl on the NCD register with a mobility restriction that also has a reading, writing, comprehension issue from NAPLAN? So there might be combinations of things in here. I think straight away, I would be looking at how I address literacy in the class. If I've got 6 students on the NCCD and 10 with some kind of reading, writing, comprehension on their NAPLAN profile, and an English as a second language student, before I even look at having to teach girls, which is going to be a struggle for me, or mobility issues or autism spectrum, I would be looking at literacy. One would assume that we're having to look at circuitry and how to read a circuit. What's the best thing about electronic circuits when you have to read them? What do they use? Are we using words? Any electricians in the group? It's a lot of symbols. So this unit almost gears beautifully to literacy problems because we're relying on interpreting symbols as opposed to interpreting words, reading, writing, comprehension. Yeah, we're looking at visuals, Carissa, that's right. So a simple light that uses a combination of materials and a circuit that is designed for a specific purpose or user. I think what we're looking at is simplifying the task across the board, right? How much is a combination? How many do I need for it to be a combination of materials? Really drill down. 2, 2 or more. So for the students that you think are going to have struggles, limit them to 2. If you don't want it to be a publicized issue, limit the whole class to 2. When we were looking at design briefs, the more limitations and restrictions and considerations you can attach, the better it's going to be for kids. So straight away, we've limited the combination of materials they need to use. And we're looking at using a circuit that's going to have visual information as opposed to written. Let's have a look at what it actually looks like. All right. So this is student examples of what it looks like. And you can see even the most basic ones, like the pussycat in the front, it still works. It's very effective. Very effective. The fire with the little sticks behind it, that's beautiful. What a cool interpretation of the design brief. And then the one with all the poker work with the lighthouse and it's fully encased and all of the circuitry's away, that's probably going to be our higher end student with practical. But they all work. Looking at the work samples, can you tell what was modified and how it was modified? Like, is it clearly obvious? Or can we just see a range of projects? What about this one? Talk about interpreting the task differently.
I feel like myself, like I'm overwhelmed looking at the pictures at the moment.
Hmm. It's amazing what students can achieve with the right attitude and with the right teacher encouraging their positives. Looking at this, it looks to me like the S down the bottom, at first glance, I'm like, oh, that's fairly basic. But then when you notice that all of the holes are different colors, like time and energy have gone into that, and the pattern repeats itself correctly. So that's really cute. This little camera, like how good is that? There's some amazing little samples in here. Gosh, kids are clever. I think too, when you're looking at modification and differentiation, it's really easy to get caught up in what it says on the page and get like instantly panicked. Craig's little suggestion, and even Jabon's that little whip around activities and things, diagnostic tasks, which is what we're talking about here. It's a task that a teacher uses to diagnose. Not that we're doctors, we clarified that, but we can diagnose our own suspicions. The diagnostic task is when you're like, I actually don't know what these kids know. And I'm going to give them a little thing to do so I can gauge what their understanding is. I use it teaching junior food tech. Food tech is not my forte with teaching. I'm definitely an industrial arts person, woodwork, metalwork, multimedia, that kind of stuff. And when we teach food tech, it's one of those subjects where when you teach in a workshop, there's a healthy dose of fear for most of the kids that we teach in there. So there's a bit of a respect for the tools and that things are sharp and splinters happen and things. When you're teaching in a kitchen, they've all got that at home. There's nothing to be afraid of here. I can do what I want. And there are some students that are so cavalier with knives and microwaves and putting metal in the oven and then picking it up with their hands, like, so silly. So, a diagnostic task I like to do is be like, how do you cook at home? What food do you help with? Who does the cooking? What kind of food do you like? How are you at washing dishes? What do you know about nutrition? Things like that. And you can kind of get an idea about where their starting point is before they come in. One of the most popular, I suppose, modifications that I do in my classes is extending kids that are really good with their hands because I have a lot of country boarders. And these are kids that own their own chainsaw and dirt bikes and they're breaking down sheep for their like meat farm and all that kind of stuff. And then they come to my classroom and I'm like, oh no, sorry, Declan, you can't use the belt sander. You're going to have to use this hand sanding tool. And they're like, oh, miss, I put my own chainsaw at home. So how can I keep those kids engaged, but still looking at the workplace health and safety outcomes that I have to teach within, but also that they're not bored, because bored kids will start acting up and doing silly things, boys especially. I'm sure all of you have got some experience with teenage boys or being a teenage boy. Bored kids get up to mischief. Craig still is a teenage boy. Good. Well, don't get bored, Craig. Um, so let's keep going. This is another little variation here. This is really cool if you're doing electronics. And electronics is unfortunately one of those dying focus areas in industrial tech because we just don't get the students doing it. It's become an expensive kind of outcome. But this is conductive Play-Doh. So the Play-Doh actually reacts, electrical currents can go through it. So cool. Would this be a realistic modification to the previous task that had circuitry in it? If you're considering your students with sensory issues or mobility issues, even cognitive stuff, it's a great modification. They're still meeting the task. There's a circuit there. At the base level, what do they need to know in a circuit? So there's a power source, and it travels in a circuit, and it lights up a bulb, and it's connected. Yeah, it does use a combination of materials and it has a circuit. Don't be afraid to think outside of the box. The other thing I would think too, in terms of what is the skill you actually want them to take away from this? What's the knowledge that you want? And then that's what you focus on. Especially when you've got life skills kids. Do you want them to be able to come into a classroom and be able to find the tools that they need? If you say, okay, grab me a hammer and a tri-square, do you want them to be able to go do that? Or do you want them to be able to measure? Do you want them to, yeah, low risk and builds confidence. Absolutely, Carissa. It's focusing on their strengths. It's getting them a win across the board with any student, regardless of the modifications they need, is always going to be the best thing. You want those kids to feel a sense of accomplishment, pride, and all that self-esteem that comes with it. It's only going to build on top of, on top of. And if they know that they can do this, then they're going to want to push to do more. Okay, so where do we start? So this relates a little bit to assessment task two. Data, 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 so much data. Make notes about what you see in class. Now, this doesn't have to be journaling notes unless you do that already. I'd keep that private. It could literally just be a mental note in your head that, oh, I'm not going to do that on a Wednesday afternoon anyway. All right. Think, have I modified? Have I adjusted? It doesn't have to be a big, arduous thing to do modifications or adjustments, right? You'll find, especially prac teachers, you'll be amazed at how many kids can't cut a straight line. How, and you'll explain one way to do something, and then you'll look at how they're doing it and go, oh no, that doesn't make sense. I'll have to adjust it for this boy or for this student. You're doing modifications and adjustments on the fly all the time without it being like a set thing that you have to go about and labor over textbooks and Google and all that kind of stuff. You will be modifying as you go. You will get halfway through teaching something and realize that every single pair of eyes in the classroom is focused on a plastic bag blowing outside the window than you. And you'll go, oh, something's not right. You might be going through tasks that you've made and on the fly go, actually, a better way of saying it is this. Take a note of all of that. All right. Every time you adjust something or modify, think in the back of your head, how can I help this student achieve? What do I have to do to get it across for this kid? One thing that I picked up from a teacher very early on, standard timber thicknesses, for those of you not in timber, would be 12 millimeters and 19 millimeters. It's really hard to count by 19s, so you count by 20s and -1 for each piece. A kid thought I was a magician when I told him that. So that's amazing. Right? It's finding little ways to get the same information across and then making a note of it. think about what the limitations of assessment are. So, is the assessment that you're doing the right assessment for this child? Is it going to give you a reasonable snapshot into what they can do? Or does the assessment need to change? Does it need to change for the class? Or does it just need to change for this student? It could be as simple as them telling you the answers rather than writing it down. Don't be afraid to reach out to other teachers, and certainly don't be afraid to reach out to parents. Again, consider that some schools have systems in place about how you contact parents or who contacts the parents. At my school, often that comes down to the housemaster or the mentor, the like a roll call teacher. So a teacher will get in contact with us, and then we might be the first point of call, and we'll say, oh, Mrs. Pergerio has said XYZ. Can we do a meeting? Different schools will have different ways of doing it. All right. This is looking at assessment task 2. So in terms of this first page, this is the template that you're looking at for assessment task 2 when you're doing your lesson plan and lesson materials. Let's pick, what are we going to do? Which one out of the ones that are there? Are we looking at weaving, the little cardboard crane, fried rice, silver jewelry, dominoes, or wearable tech? Just as a sample. In terms of populating, remembering that anything that is in orange, oh, sorry, but Kant's got a question. Can we change assessments according to the students in the same classroom? Yeah, absolutely. Again, in consultation with your head of faculty, depending on what the assessment task is and depending on the year group. But you can absolutely modify class tasks, class assessments according to the students in the same classroom. Absolutely. Absolutely, you can. This too, I suppose, in terms of the data that we're collecting for years 7 to 10, will then shape what they have to do in year 11 and 12. And that's when will become HSC adjustments or final exams, depending on your state. So the more you can put in place in the lower grades, the better they have for that. Okay. Remembering that, sorry, with this task here, anything that's orange, you can use ChatGPT. Anything that's blue should just be pasted straight out of the syllabus. Make sure that you've trained whatever AI you're using effectively. Make sure it's got all the correct data. Make sure it's coming from the right syllabus, the right state, the right age group, the right technology that you want to do. I think there's a little task due on the 12th, a little discussion task where you're looking at your state subject and the correct documentation. In terms of your unit of work, a unit of work we've already looked at, that could go for 10 weeks, it could go for 20 weeks, depending on how long that's going. You don't have to do the whole unit of work. You're looking at the first 4 weeks. Okay, so a lot of the stuff you should have is introduction. It should be in the what to do this week, but can't, in terms of the announcements that come up, what to do. Or where I'm up to, the ones that Monique puts up on announcements for week 4. That's true. Yeah, AI just agrees with whatever you ask it, tell it. You got to train it. AI is a very effective tool. It's one of these things, especially for teaching, especially for putting tasks together. One of my favorite things. Craig, you don't have to, but I would look at where you're getting it from in terms and just double check it with the syllabus. So one of the easiest things you can do with a syllabus is you can put it into something like ChatGPT or the Adobe one, the one that whose name I just can't remember, and ask it to write you a task based on those syllabus dot points. It will be a flimsy task. It won't be fully fleshed out. It won't be enough for this. But it's a really good place to kind of go, oh, okay. When you're looking at the rationale You need to put in the aims, the key ideas, the learning, all of that kind of stuff. I'll double check, Craig, with proposing the assessment as to you could literally copy and paste it from the curriculum. I would be mindful of modifying sample programs, that there's already going to be a high level of similarity in this. Have a look at the programs at the department website. They are not necessarily the most relevant to everyone's situation and whether or not it fits in with what you're doing, right? Absolutely, if you want to look at the program there, if you want to base your unit plan on the stuff that's already there, absolutely, I would make sure you reference it. But if you are basing your unit of work on someone else's program, is that going to give you the marks that you want for the unit of work and the lesson materials that you need to hand in? Just think about that in terms of the academic rigor that's needed in the marking criteria. I think in terms of the content, you need to be looking at assessment two, I think is due, is it May? Whatever week 6 is. What does week 6 work out to be? I think everyone at Southern Cross has got the same due date. It would help. 20th of April. Week 6, Monday, 20th of April is your due date. I just looked it up. Talking out of my ear there. I would be looking at it's cumulative knowledge as well. Okay. I think, but can't, if that's a lesson that you want to do, then that's how you design a statement in a brief, right? Remembering when we were looking at that unit last week, we were looking at the design situation being the context and the design brief being more drilled down to the problem or the task. All right. Remembering too that a design brief doesn't fit into every technologies. If you're doing industrial technology, they don't use a design brief. They use a statement of intent. All right. It could also be the first 4 weeks of anything. All right. And then looking at the lesson materials, you need to do a lesson plan, which I'm working on doing a sample for you guys, and a teaching resource should be created in there somewhere. It's up to you what that teaching resource is. Is it a worksheet? Is it a folio? Is it questions about a click view? Is it something you want them to do? Is it a drawing exercise? But a teaching resource needs to be in there, and they need to be linked, and they can be from any part of the unit. So you're picking the first 4 weeks of a plan. When you plan out, remember this is your scope and sequence, you'd plan it out. My suggestion would be kind of work out what syllabus you want to do, read it pretty well, have a look at what you want to do. Then roughly sketch out the tasks that you think students will be doing within that syllabus to pick a project. So if I was going to do year 7-8 technologies, the 2023 version from New South Wales, for the materials component, I would be looking at a wooden toolbox. And in that toolbox unit, I would just start listing the tasks that I think kids would have to do. There'd have to be some safety, there'd be an introduction. I would do some kind of demonstration on tools. The students would be building. Maybe I'd have a sketching element and a CAD. Maybe there's not time. Maybe it's just hand sketching. Do I want them to do pictorial and orthogonal? Is that too much for year 7? Do I want some kind of folio where they've got to do a design brief or statement of intent? Research into timber properties. Maybe I'm looking at glue, finishes. Is there a design element in the toolbox, or do I just want them to read plans? You don't have to use the learning outcome. Oh, sorry, it can be the same learning outcome for assessment 1. It doesn't need to be different. All right, you might want to focus on the same syllabus. I think if you look at, choose the syllabus, choose the project, write down the tasks, then look at the tasks in a logical sequence, right? Before they kick off with prac, they're going to have to do some kind of safety. That's mandated. That's a legislative requirement. Let's have a look at a little example. All right. So for the ACARA, this is an ACARA example, the food and fiber. We're analyzing how food and fiber are produced when designing managed environments and how these can become more sustainable. That's the outcome. Then we're investigating the management of plant and animal growth through natural means and with the use of chemical products like herbicides and medicines when producing food and fiber products. All right, so we can see there that it's from the Queensland education website, but it is referring back to the design and technologies curriculum from the Australian curriculum. Here are some examples of strategies that can teach this content. I'm going to write a glossary of terms. I'm watching Garden Australia. We all love Costa. I would absolutely recommend that. We're researching, student-led research, using a window planner box to grow them, conduct an experiment, a jigsaw activity. There's a real range of tasks in there. Depending on how many lessons you have in a week, you'd be looking at, for years 7 and 8, you're probably looking at between 4 and 5 lessons in a cycle, right? Most schools will do a 2-week cycle. So if you look at that, is it 8 to 10 lessons? And we're looking at 4 weeks of a termly plan. So it's not going to be 4 lessons necessarily. You're not going to have 1 lesson a week. But what am I going to do in week 1 when I'm investigating the management of plant and animal growth? I would probably recommend sticking with plants. I think if you're getting kids to grow animals at school, it's a mess. Not impossible, but it's a mess. Would you give the students the glossary? Would that be a task that they do at the beginning? You might introduce the unit, show them some work samples, introduce them to some of the concepts that they're going to have, and then their first folio task would be, here's a glossary, complete this. If you were going to get them to watch a Gardening Australia segment, you've got to put some questions in there so you can assess learning. Make sure that you know they've watched it. Stuff they can't just look up. Are they going to make the planner box? Is it something you're providing? What do we want them to get out of it? All right. If we look at the assessment outcomes, this isn't necessarily a logical sequence of tasks yet, but it's examples of how we can assess student learning and understanding of that outcome. So we need to have clear alignment between curriculum outcomes, learning activities, teaching strategies, and assessment approaches. So learning progresses logically and it supports cumulative knowledge development. You are only taking a snapshot. It's 4 weeks of a 10-week unit. So they shouldn't know everything by the end. It's less than half the time. Keep that in mind. We're not saying that your students need to be experts by the end of this task. This is just a tiny bit. If we had to ask you to do 10 weeks, it'd just be way too much to mark. It's too much. All right. Think about evidence-informed teaching practice, clear sequencing of content, modeling, new knowledge or skills, literacy, numeracy. How does it align to the expectations of the curriculum? The other example I was looking at here, we might not have time to go through this all, but I'll talk. This is where a lot of our metalwork fits into at my school. We've got a very metalwork heavy school. So we do the materials and production as metalwork as opposed to woodwork. I'm looking at selects and safely uses tools, materials, technologies, and processes. In the NESA technology syllabus, these are the 3 outcomes that I thought would most relate. Use tools, machines, techniques, technologies, and processes to develop practical skills. Selects tools, materials, techniques, and technologies, and demonstrates safe practice. I think you're coming up with your own project idea, Bekant. So realistically, it's an easy Google search to kind of look at what state are you in? If you're in New South Wales, I'd be looking up stage 4 practical projects. Yeah, New South Wales. Look up stage 4 practical projects. Any like simple, depends on what you want to do it in. Simple woodwork projects. Most of it are going to be boxes. Metalwork might be repousse, might be a food technology, whatever your interest and strength lies. The idea with this task is it's meant to be a teaching resource for you. Queensland, same thing. You could be looking at year 7 timber projects. Queensland are pretty active with posting stuff, but I'm not sure where they post it. Whether or not you look at their work samples on their website first. All the state education things should have work samples. But if you're looking at like year 7, right? Year 7, year 8, up to what you want to do, it's a very easy Google search. Having a look at stuff like that, student examples, student made things. I think to answer all your questions, where are the projects? Can we take those projects and single projects within this one? You can absolutely take projects that you find online. All right. Work samples. Try the Queensland website first. If you can't find those work samples, it might just be a tailored Google search with that. Queensland technology work samples. Um, year 7, year 8, whatever stage you want to put it into there. Remembering too that you can take a project that exists in a different state and rework it for your state, right? I think first things first, work out what syllabus you want to focus in, but can't. Let's break it down. You've got time. I know 26 days doesn't sound like a long time, but you do. Work out what syllabus you feel most comfortable in, and then actually read what the expectations are of the student in that syllabus and see where you can find something that satisfies it. Most syllabuses, especially in year 7 and 8, can be manipulated into where you want to go. I know manipulation may not be the right word. The materials and production. Okay. Have a look through materials and production. For the most part, in materials and production, they are looking at producing an object. So, what's an object you would want them to do? For the most part, in New South Wales, it's going to be a woodwork unit. It's going to be something physical that they're taking home with them. It might be a clock, it might be a candy dispenser, a pinball machine, a toolbox. We use a lot of boxes, a step stool, something like that. It needs to be relatively straightforward. All right. If you're looking at materials and productions from a textiles perspective, it might be a pillowcase, it might be a tote bag. All right. So it's a product and that they're taking it home, something that they can use a range of tools, machines, techniques, technologies, that kind of stuff. All right. It's not too tricky. And I think,
Kobe, I've got a
yes,
question. Sorry.
of course.
So
Yep.
I'm doing another unit as well,
Yep.
which have got like similar
Similar. Yeah,
kind of things. So let's say if I select the same outcome, when I describe it, I mean, I'm not saying I'll copy the same, but it might be similar language, right? Because I'm the
that's
same
fine.
person
Look,
writing it.
don't worry about it. I think there's a couple of other students that are in the same thing. I think that
Yeah.
this assignment, there's going to be a different level of similarity because we are asking you to copy so much. So
Yeah,
don't worry.
because the other
If
one
it
is
relates,
also the lesson plan and then
yeah,
show up outcomes and everything. So it's
don't worry
basically
about
the
it.
same thing with like
Yeah,
a
no, it's fine.
different description. So
Yeah, look, I wouldn't worry about it. It's up to you. I think if you're worried about self-plagiarism in terms of that, it might be just a question I can maybe pop it on the discussion board and Monique can have a look at that because she didn't ask for that to be on discussion. But realistically, it's an opportunity for you to do something different. I wouldn't recommend doing the exact same necessarily, but you might want to stay within the same syllabus. Don't double your work necessarily, but it might be two versions or it might be different chunks of the lesson plan or a different practical task within the same syllabus. So you can double up on some of the content.
okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Look, I've got a little bit of time if there's anyone else that has questions about the task, but I am aware that it is the day before a long weekend. So if anyone does need to go, that's the end of our time, but I will hang around if anyone does have questions. Thank you so much for tonight. I appreciate it. And the recording will be up very soon.
Thanks, Kobe. Have a great Easter weekend.
Oh, you too. Thank you. Enjoy your time off.
Hello, Kobe. I've got the cat
Hi, how are
meowing right
you?
next to me.
Yeah,
She's gonna knock things over. She does get a bit like that. All right.
that's okay.
Um, when I was looking at the Queensland,
Hmm.
um, the outcomes for the technologies context, food specializations, there's just one outcome. But then
Okay.
when I put my outcomes in, I only put that one in, and then Monique asked me to put in more outcomes. So I picked some from the processes and skills.
Yeah, perfect.
That's
Perfect.
okay.
Yeah, of
All right.
course.
Oh,
That's
good.
okay. These things happen. The other thing you can do too is if you're worried about it, there's plenty of I mean, I'm just going to use the internet for good rather than evil, right? If you type in food specialization lesson plan and just see what pops up,
Okay.
see what's
Yep.
there, see what people are doing, because it is very limiting. And it's one of
Yep.
these things, New South Wales has too many outcomes. So we're always used to doing like heaps, but not every lesson plan has to meet every outcome.
Oh,
So
okay.
you can kind of, because you're going to have it cumulative over a year. In a year, you have to meet all the outcomes. This is just a term, and it's only 4
Yep.
weeks of a term. So I think it's perfectly fine for you to look at other examples that are there and also add things in from other syllabuses. Not a problem. Absolutely not a problem.
Oh, so if there's technologies and society, I can look at bringing in some of that
Yeah.
outcome.
So society might work really well with food too, if you're looking at food
Yep.
security and things like that.
Yep.
That's a really interesting one. I know for the year 7 food technology syllabus in New South Wales, there's a lot about food security and intolerances and things like that. And it's a really easy thing to kind of look at a recipe and go, how would a lactose intolerant person adapt this?
Yep.
And getting
Yep.
them thinking about that. So yeah, I think as long as it relates to what you're doing, I think kids can smell a rat with things like that when you're like, why are we doing this? And you're like, oh, I don't know. So as long as it's something that feels like it authentically relates to what you want them to do, add it in. Especially if
Okay.
Monique said add in extra outcomes, I would do it.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Does
Thank
that
you
help?
very, very much.
Very welcome. I'm glad I can help.
Sorry, this
Not a
she
problem.
just that's all right. The cat just wants some attention.
It's okay. And you're also on her laptop, I'm assuming.
Yeah, must be.
It's all right. My two dogs, I'm sure they were very noisy, but they were just decided they're now fast asleep because they're
Oh,
terribly behaved. But just in the middle of that lecture, decided they'd have a full-on rumble right behind me.
oh.
That's
This is the
fine.
first time I've lived with cats,
Oh,
so I've got
really?
to know cats. I grew up with dogs.
Oh, okay.
It's my
I've had,
friend's cats, but one always sleeps in my room and sleeps with me.
oh, that's lovely. Well, just as long as you know that everything in your house is theirs and they want it whenever you're using it, you'll be fine.
Oh, okay, I'm getting used to that. Thank you.
All good.
Thank you
Did
for
that
all your
help?
help, Kobe.
No, no, it's not a
Yes, yes.
problem.
Yeah,
Enjoy
because I
the,
was feeling it was a bit constrictive. There was only one outcome for my teaching area.
yeah,
But I'm also like, I'm a home economics teacher. So, although I haven't taught for 10 years,
yeah.
and I'm just kind of registered again and starting to come back into it
Oh,
again.
wonderful.
And so
Congratulations.
they required me to do an update.
Yeah,
And so I've also got the whole textiles area that is my area as well
yeah.
that I can look at
Look,
too.
I think it's important that you base it on something you're passionate about and that you're likely to use in your teaching life. So if you want to go with food tech, go with it. But it does not hurt to add in a couple of extra little things. I think the one about society is a really good one to
Yeah,
put
I
in
like
there.
that one.
Yeah, and it actually it's so broad and open that it really helps contextualize a lot of things. So as long
Yeah.
as you're happy to go that way, I think that's a really good, it's good advice from Monique to do.
All right. Thank you ever so much.
You're
May you
welcome.
have a
Enjoy your
great
weekend.
weekend.
Oh, you
Yeah,
too.
thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.